Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about something a little bit different. They called us Enemy. So this was a graphic novel released in 2019 by, was it Top Hat? Yes. And it's not exactly the sort of the lightest of readings. It depicts the early childhood of George Takei, who, for anyone that doesn't know, is Sulu from the original Star Trek. And during the events of World War II, I don't even know how old he was. He was a young child. I don't think they actually say how old. During the events of World War II, him and his family were relocated from their house, I believe in San Francisco, to a concentration camp. I can't even remember where now. Arizona, somewhere in the desert. And it's a grueling experience, even just reading it, just seeing the kind of things that they had to go through. I think it was 2 years. Now, even 2 years is an incredible amount of time for people to be taken away from civilization, essentially, and completely segregated around barbed wire fences. The children ended up thinking that the experience they had was normal. And George Takei goes on to say things like that. You know, later on in life, he realised that that wasn't a normal thing. It's not, like I said, it's not the sort of the lightest of reading. It is, I don't want to go so far as say traumatic, but it's not a pleasure to read. And don't get me wrong, it's written incredibly well. But when you're hearing the things that they had to go through, the struggles where, you know, that these houses were put up for them, I'm assuming by the US government, and they were essentially ovens, because I think they were made of mostly like metals in the desert, middle of nowhere. And it's just absolutely shocking, the kind of things that they had to do. It sounds like they made the best of a bad situation. If this was any other book, you might at times call it an unreliable narrator. Because even George Takei, at times it seems like he might be getting mixed up with some things. I think the relationship between him and his dad is also very emotional. And it shows the impact that his dad had upon him as a person and his life. And it seems like such a shame that there were times when he kind of like confronted his dad in the way that his dad dealt with certain situations. It's definitely a tough book to read, even thinking about the kind of things that they had to go through. Like, again, it's all terms that are thrown around today, like misinformation. I'm not too sure they would use those terms back then, but they were saying things like that. They were saying misinformation, propaganda. So this is where I'm thinking that there might be a little bit of a narrator issue there. But I can completely understand the point that he's trying to make. Like when the bombings of Hiroshima happened, and I think Nagasaki was just a couple of weeks maybe after that, word got to the camps, and quite a few of them just didn't believe it because they felt that it was propaganda and misinformation from the US government to try and demoralize them. And it's things like that where you just think that that's how completely separated from society they are. And it shows how traumatic it must have been for the older members of camp, and especially someone as he says in the book, like George's father ended up being one of the leaders, you know, the sort of the management people that everything kind of went through between them and the US government. And it must have been really tough for him to stand up and be strong during those times. It is overall a a very good book, and it's an incredible read. There are some issues with it, though, I have to admit. From a narrator perspective, or a narrative perspective, the book does jump around a little bit. There are times when he's talking about himself as a child within the camp itself, but then also jumping forward 15 or so years as a young man complaining to his father about things. And then he jumps back to childhood age. And it does that a couple of times. And for me personally, you get so engrossed within the story of his time at the camp, seeing the kind of things that they went through, that I didn't really want the jump to, was it the 1960s or so, when he's out of it and he's starting to question things from a political perspective. I would rather have the narrative linear in this particular case, because I think it pushes more of an emotional button, essentially. There's also a couple other things towards the end of the book where I feel that his politics does definitely show, and he's maybe slightly incorrect with a few things, but I'm not gonna sort of point them out, because at the end of the day, this book is not really about sort of the culture of today and today's politics. It's about the shocking things that he went through as a child, as a member of the Japanese American people, and how they were treated at the hands of the US government. It's a hard book to read, as I said. It's mostly well written, and it's still interesting to read from even today, just because we don't want to forget the things of our past. I believe it's something that he actually says in the book, and he quotes it. I think it might have been from Barack Obama. He quotes it, although I believe there's been a number of quotes along the same sort of lines. That if you forget your past, you're more likely to recreate those in the present and the future. So it's still an interesting read from that point of view, and I haven't read Mouse, but I would look at it in the same kind of genre, essentially. And I don't want to just lump in all World War II refugee camps in the same kind of field. But from what I've heard of Mouse, it seems like it's potentially more hard-hitting than this. I can only imagine it's definitely more hard-hitting than this from a Jewish man's perspective. But it's still along the same lines of a different side of the same war, different side of the same conflict that was happening. And it's, like I said, it's shocking to see the kind of things that they had to go through, and it's truly awful, and they shouldn't have been treated that way. But I do think, overall, this is a book that is well worth reading. And I have to say that I've come out of it with a newfound respect for George Takei. I can disagree with his politics completely, but knowing what he went through, I respect him, and I can completely understand the kind of decisions that he's making based on his life. But I think that's potentially missing from the discourse today. Understanding people's perspectives is something that I think we're severely lacking. And it was one of the things that I wanted to push myself to read this book because of, knowing the fact that I disagree with him politically, but I wanted to understand where he's coming from. And I felt like I got that. I understood his backstory. I understood the kind of things that he went through as a child. Now, this is not something that it's not a complete biography. He does dive into a little bit of the Star Trek and his time on I want to say West End, on theatres, and a little bit about sort of New Age politics, but overall it's mostly about the time that he spent in the camp. And I think that's an incredibly powerful story to tell, and I think it's one that really needed to be told. So I actually do appreciate it in the book form, although I have my slight issues with it, overall I think it's definitely a well worth read. But guys, if you have read They Called Us Enemy, let me know what you think about it down in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, because it really does help me out. And I'll see you all in the next video.